So we're now talking about the theme of engaging audiences in making content. We're showcasing gender and diversity in the media, reflecting the range of voices, people and issues across the region and communities. Diversity tells and reflects all the stories of people and societies and includes women and men, cultural and race, ethnicity, disability, sexual orientation and gender identity, generational diversity, as well as those living in different locations, which is very apt with the region that we're covering with these conferences, and social circumstances. The media can make a difference by engaging all of its audiences and potential audiences, which is very important to maximise our reach across all the region. The media also maximises its coverage, content and storytelling by having a representative workforce on air and behind the scenes that employs people with a range of backgrounds and attributes within a workplace environment that values diversity, enabling all to reach their potential, all of us. We have an outstanding group of presenters from the region, and they'll provide a snapshot of the Pacific, the demographics, the issues from communities in regard to diversity, and how the media is promoting diversity and inclusion and shaping content and services for all. The session, we're going to do it in two parts. The first will focus on the Pacific with our esteemed presenters. We'll have a Q&A then. And then I will finish up with an outline of the work of the ABU in this important area. Oh, thank you. Okay, thanks. With the Broadcasting for All focus on gender and diversity activities. I'd like to say this at this moment that we attribute this important and long-term diversity work to the extensive leadership, commitment, support and resources of the Asia Pacific Broadcasting Union and of course partners. Under the stewardship of the Secretary-General of the ABU, Dr. Javed Matagi, who continues to make it happen and to make a difference across the Asia Pacific region and beyond. So we thank him for that stewardship. Now, I'll just let you know that the moderator presenter for this session was to have been the Fiji Broadcasting Corporation's Shami Lockenlal, and she's ill. So she's unable to attend, and we do wish her a speedy recovery. So I've just taken over the role for her. We also have Janice Singh, who stepped into the breach from FBC just yesterday, and she's taking her place to outline the gender and diversity at that organisation. We're also very fortunate at the very late stage to have Mr. Ashwin Raj. I think a lot of you might know him. He's kindly agreed to participate yesterday. He's the Director, Fiji Human Rights and Anti-Discrimination Commission. He's also Chairman of the Media Industry Development Authority for Fiji. He's on the telephone, so we've got two people with us on stage and we've got two remote, one by telephone and one by Skype. He is based in Suva. He's going to deliver a short message for us, and he's going to stay online during the session if there's any questions. He will, of course, highlight to us the legislation in Fiji around human rights and anti-discrimination in regard to the media, which is very important for our content makers and journalists. So I'll now pass to Mr. Ashwin Raj. And we hope to have a photo of him on screen, and we thank him for his participation. Mr. Raj, are you on the phone? We've got a lot of tech going on for this session. Hello?
Hello. It's really faint. I can't really hear what's being said, but I hope you guys can hear me.
Ashwin, you can carry on.
Okay, so I'm having difficulty hearing the other side, but I hope people can hear me clearly.
Ashwin, if you could just deliver your message for us now.
Right, okay.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. An absolute pleasure to be able to engage in these discussions. And I think the question of diversity in the media is a very, very critical one for two reasons. One, that the media has a fundamental role in ensuring that a discursive polyphony of voices can exist. And the other, of course, is the issue of democratization of these things to ensure that not only these voices exist, but they are able to speak for themselves, that there's institutionally validated agencies, there's representation. And I think, therefore, the question of diversity is an absolutely important one, because the media can either play the role of a catalyst in opening up these spaces, or otherwise reproduce structures of discrimination and domination. So, with that, I think it's important to recognize that, at least in the case of Fiji, the Fijian Constitution, Section 26 of its Bill of Rights provisions on freedom from discrimination provides for very explicit and salutary prohibited grounds of discrimination, with reference to, but by no means limited to, race, religion, ethnicity, sex, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, disability, geography, language. And I think, therefore, it's imperative that no one is discriminated against on any of the prohibited grounds prescribed in the Section 26 of the Constitution. Why is this significant as it pertains to the media? Because of the regime of representation and the power of the media in representation, in giving credence to stereotypes, and also deconstructing stereotypes. So, we're all aware that in times of, for instance, disaster, discrimination, which is often nourished by, patriarchy, racial, religious prejudice, class differences often get accentuated, and those on the margins get doubly marginalized around these times. And these include women and children with no access to social mobility, those with disabilities, racial and religious minorities, and sexual minorities. And therefore, it's important that the media is always inclusive, includes diverse voices, clearly those on the margins of our society, by providing them a platform to raise their concerns. The media must also enter their protocols and understand and appreciate how things like natural disasters affect them as individuals and communities. The media plays a very, very powerful role in raising awareness about how prejudice actually works, how discrimination works. And like I said before, in deconstructing a lot of the stereotypes that give credence to prejudice and legitimizes it and normalizes it. So, for instance, if you look at, hate speeches, racial and religious discrimination, homophobia. All of these things are actually, significant forms of prejudice that can be deconstructed through a powerful media that begins to create a space for a discursive polyphony of voices to exist, particularly people who are subjected to discrimination. For instance, your LGBTI community or persons living with disability, and also deconstructing a lot of the stereotypes about these communities. And therefore, the media has an ethical and moral responsibility to not reproduce structures of discrimination or existing societal prejudices. Now, for instance, if you look at something like the national gender policy in the case of Fiji, it also recognizes the important role of the media. So the media, it's incumbent on the media to work towards deconstructing those stereotypes, making spaces for diverse voices, conducting investigative journalism into how things like natural disaster, climate change, specifically, it affects diverse communities. Assess what kind of adequate measures do we have in place, and whether these policies do address the concerns of the diverse communities of people. The media is also required under the law in Fiji, so the Media Industry Development Act, adhere to the Media Code of Ethics, which is aligned to the imperatives of the Bill of Rights under the Fijian Constitution, which makes an explicit reference to discrimination. So even the media laws prohibit the media from promoting discrimination. And therefore, the media has a responsibility in ensuring that minimum human rights standards are met at all times, and particularly so in times of natural disaster as it affects minorities. So, things like inclusion of sign language, interpreters, so that persons with disabilities have the right to information, know of tropical depression, evacuation centers, etc. And the media plays a very, very crucial part here. The media has an important role in exposing violence, particularly as they get accentuated in times of natural disaster. If communities or individuals have been subjected to violence, they may be exposed and reported to the authorities by the media, because it's an important conduit between the public and institutions of power. They must also ensure that there is access and equity in service delivery, food rations, so on and so forth. And so, to be able to fulfill such a critical role, the media must have a diversity strategy. It must be able to encourage and promote, even the minority media. For instance, you need to go back to, things like recruitment strategy, for instance, within mainstream media organizations, to look at the HR processes and whether they're consistent with the diversity strategy, whether they are inclusive. Are they friendly and inclusive of LGBTI community, of racial and religious minorities, persons living with disabilities, but also not only in terms of just actively recruiting these people, but also ensuring that they have enough access to the demographics they represent. So, committed programs that look at the question of diversity, look at the question of tolerance, look at the question of multiculturalism, multiracialism, questions of religious tolerance, looking at specifically addressing hate speeches and so on and so forth, is going to be extremely important, and that requires specialized gender focal points or diversity sort of focused individuals within organizations that focus on those things, making sure that the editorial policy is actually consistent with the theme of diversity and so on and so forth. So I think it's imperative that there is a very specific diversity strategy that aligns with the imperatives of the principles of non-discrimination. So these are very, very perfunctory remarks just to open up the discussions, but I'm more than happy to participate in further discussions on this matter.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ashwin, for those words that covered the discrimination in the workplace, in the media, touching on the diversity of content, recruitment in the workplace. And thank you for that in your words, and thank you for staying on the line. I'm now going to introduce the next speaker, which is Janice Singh, Director of Human Resources, Fiji Broadcasting Corporation. She has over 10 years experience in human resources in both the private and the public sector. Thanks, Janice.
Thank you, Chrissy. I'm actually sitting in today, as Chrissy had mentioned, for my colleague Shami, who was not able to make it. I'm not going to take too much of your time, but I will I've been given 2 minutes by Chrissy, so I'll make sure I stick within the time frame. With regards to diversity and gender, it's becoming more a management approach which is being implemented effectively in many institutions now, more so than before. And the reason for this is because it's really important for a growing and healthy organization. Also because of the fact that positions of influence within the organization can actually accelerate these policies or strategies quicker and faster within the organization. At the Fiji Broadcasting Corporation, we have around 40% of women within the organization, and 60% of men. We have quite a number of women in leading roles across the organization, and that is something we are trying to sort of increase going into 2018. Without taking too much of your time, we've prepared a short video clip because it's quite self-explanatory, and just on some of the initiatives that we've implemented across the organization for you to see today.
Bula, I'm Andy Blake, and I'm a producer and TV host here at FBC TV. Now, FBC promotes gender equality through the Project Chechemon Fashion Designer and Model Awards. This is a fashion awards that we hold annually and is open to both male and female designers as well as models. And I'm also a host of Fashion Tips. Now, this airs every day where I give out fashion tips to both our male and female viewers.
The advantage to this program is that it's a one-hour tote bag show live on radio, where listeners get a chance to call and interact live with guests and the host, which is me, and they share their experience, they give suggestions. It's a very interactive show, and then later played on FBC TV twice a week.
A number of women that work here at FBC, including the head of programs, who is a female, also our HR, and the first Andi Walesi is a woman. I've been working here for long enough under female bosses, and it's really great, and it's a big change also, I think.
We also observe women and men's national holidays or observances. By that I mean when it comes to October, there's usually Breast Cancer Awareness Month. That's what October is known for. And with October, observed annually right around the world as Pinktober, and that being Breast Cancer Awareness Month, the men in the office usually have something prepared for the ladies. And we also have the same for the men or the gentlemen in the building, which is November. That is called Movember, quite similar to Pinktober. So when it comes to Movember, women get together to celebrate men and also help encourage them in the workplace, men who suffer from cancer. Sort of like a global awareness that we usually talk about, not only in the office, but we usually put it out on radio. Being in a radio department, we help encourage each other when it comes to those national observances.
As part of FBC's commitment to have a diverse and inclusive workforce, FBC introduced a Women's Leadership Forum in the workplace. The idea is to provide a space where our women are able to exchange information that will help them succeed in leading roles. FBC also hosts the Parliament channel through the recently launched Walesi Digital TV platform, keeping not only our regular audience informed, but also including speech and hearing impaired by utilizing sign language translators. FBC features talk shows, news, and informative programs in English and also in Itoke and Hindi language. It is our policy to subtitle all vernacular TV programs and talkback shows because our nation will grow in a healthy way when we encourage an inclusive dialogue. On a regular basis, FBC News reports on issues of marginalized communities, and through our human interest stories, such as Successful Fijian, we encourage our nation to accept and embrace each other in its full diversity. In awareness of the multicultural makeup of our society, FBC has also produced a series of trilingual nation-building ads with the intent to build racial harmony and acceptance among each other.
For way too long, many of us have judged and described our fellow Fijians according to their cultural backgrounds, beliefs, and appearances.
क्या ये अच्छी बात नहीं होगी कि हम इस आदत को छोड़कर एक दूसरे को सिर्फ इंसान समझें?
Kendo atal nang nauna ina maniado mo baka madalata ka indo na liuni bonua ka kuni dabuta se mata tamataba baleta ni kotokina na bibo kan indo itaki baka mata tamata.
Let's all promise today to change the way we treat each other.
Thanks, Janice. That was terrific, and it was great to see that the diversity of faces and voices working for FBC, and also the events that you have there, and your networking opportunities for women, and that you've got the data, that you've measured where you're up to, and thank you very much for giving us that overview of Fiji Broadcasting Corporation. We now have the other speaker who's remotely joining us today. This is someone who's joining us by Skype. Has she joined us now? Yeah, okay. And she's already spoken over the last couple of days, so she probably doesn't need too much of an introduction, but Sharon Bagel-Rolls, Executive Producer Director of FemLink Pacific and co-chair of the Board of Directors Global Fund for Women, is going to share with us her work in the important area of gender and women's organisations, how she started her work in this area and what the progress and future directions are. Thank you so much for joining us, Sharon. Thank you.
Thank you again, and thanks again for this opportunity to address the colleagues that are attending the conference in Nadi. My journey has been quite an interesting one in terms of being a woman who's worked in the mainstream media, and of course, since we established FemLink Pacific in 2000 here in Fiji, working to generate more diversity in content to progress the goals of women's rights, gender equality rights, and in particular, looking at the portrayal of women in the media and saying we're not a heteronormative group of people. We are diverse as women because of our age, because of our sexual orientation and gender identity, because of our ability, because of where we live. We are women in rural and remote communities, and also because we lead differently. So what I'm going to focus on today is to maybe map out a little bit ahead of Lisa's presentation on a bit of the journey that a number of us have taken as Pacific women working in the media industry in our collective goals to promote with an initial focus around gender diversity and inclusion, and to identify also maybe from an Asia Pacific perspective what we are also doing as community radio broadcasters who belong to the World Association of Community Radio Broadcasters, AMAC, and the Asia Pacific region, where we've really have seen an important inclusion and recognition, particularly of the need to be more gender inclusive, the need to support women's leadership very distinctively within the community radio network, and also to ensure that as a result of these policy commitments, whether it was the journey of the Beijing Platform for Action that catalyzed policy for our governments and for media organizations, but also for civil society, to really start to analyze using tools such as the Global Media Monitoring Project, to really assess what is our content saying? Is our content truly, as Ashwin said, representative of that diversity in our communities? And that as broadcasters, no matter what scale we're creating content, to be aware of how do we also utilize this type of data to also challenge ourselves and contextualize ourselves, not simply, I think, to be reporting on climate change and DRR, but to be really aware of that political landscape in which women of all diversities, members of the LGBT community, disability rights activists are working in challenging that status quo, that if the media content does not change, if the media content does not unpack some of the underlying powers, we're going to simply see what we have been challenged to do in these commitments to gender equality. We need to address stereotypes, so that's about content. We need to have policies in place that also recognize and support, as our colleague from Fiji Broadcasting Commission has said, women's leadership roles, but also the opportunities for leadership to promote that kind of diversity in the content, whether you work as a day-to-day journalist or whether you're a program producer. And I think the challenge for me, as I said the other day, is to do it in a way that is not just symbolic, but the need to really unpack some of the realities in Asia and in the Pacific that are really challenging us as society to understand why is it that women are only making the news because of a certain commercial hype, or we're in content that may be seen to be okay, but not really getting to the heart of the matter. For example, on the BBC World Service today, there was a very interesting conversation that it's been 100 years since women got the right to vote in the UK. But the conversation also unpacked the reality that women fought for that right. And why did they have to fight for that right? That women, not all women, were given the vote because of social, economic, and political structures and hierarchies. Are we asking the same question today in our Asia-Pacific region, where we are trying to deal with a number of these issues? So for us, as an organization that takes a community media approach, we've been very pleased to see that the National Gender Policy of Fiji, as Ashwin said, has a very specific reference to women and the media, and a recognition of community media that is that enabling factor to ensure diversity of content. But I think we still have a long way to go at the many different levels in which we're working, so that we do get the type of support as part of the broader broadcasting sector to sustain the kind of content we're producing, whether it's with young women, whether it's with the LGBT community, whether it's with the disability community, because our small radio network has made a very dedicated and very committed approach to a program that we call Look at My Abilities. It's on every week. It's bringing in stories from disability networks across Fiji. It's a program where we're supporting young women with disabilities to be the producers and broadcasters. We have Rainbow Connections. I believe, Ashwin, you've been part of that as well. That is supporting representatives of the LGBT community to really communicate their issues. So I think we all have many different roles to play, and to allow for more conversation, I'll pause there. But just to add by saying, ultimately, I think we're all, regardless of where we are positioned in the hierarchy, if you want, of broadcasting, the ultimate goal is diversity, pluralism, and of course ensuring a liberal media landscape. Naka.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sharon, for your work that you're doing there, and for raising and continuing the theme that diversity is about leadership, it's about content, it's about recruitment, it's about employment, and having that environment, and that it does cover a range of people's attributes and backgrounds. Thank you. So now we're going to hear from Lisa, and I'm just going to welcome her and congratulate her on her new position that she had. She was appointed last week as a senior journalist for the Pacific Media Network New Zealand. She's based in Auckland. She's a Cook Islander, and she was amongst the first wave of Pacific women documentary producers in TV broadcasting in the 90s. Launched by UNESCO, Australia and other partners. The 10-year initiative helped to grow the numbers of women in broadcast production and content, led by women producers on the stories that mattered to them. It helped support the current vision of broadcasting for all, which is a term that we've adopted at the ABU a number of years ago. Since then, her journey as a journalist, producer and trainer across the Pacific includes 6 years in communicating gender journalism and advocacy of gender empowerment across the Pacific region and global networks, and most recently 4 years communicating Pacific oceanic fisheries, where she was also part of an interagency regional working group on gender. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. Kia ora tātou katoa, Sambula Vinaka. I'm holding back tears. Just thinking about the journey that we've come, and Sharon knows what I'm talking about, don't you, Sharon? But just going back to those early days when, as a freshie in television, and being introduced to a world where all of a sudden, UNESCO and the powers that be, the funding powers, and our governments and our bosses, who were all men, sat us in a room and said, we're going to give you money, you're going to make a film, you choose what it's about, you're in charge. Yeah, that's the response they got. We looked at each other. It was a new freedom and a new power that we didn't know how to use. And then, 2 years later, when it became competitive and UNESCO introduced the award system, an unforgettable moment, because the Cook Islands was hosting, and the chairman of the Board of Broadcasting walked past me and he said, you do know that if you don't bring home the awards because we are hosting, you'll be without a job next week. I was sure he was joking, but I wasn't certain. And I tell you, once he told me that, I never slept. And we did bring home the awards with that added pressure, of course. I just want to say that in terms of that journey, it started out as very much gender was the focus, women in the media producing and controlling and having the tools of production was the focus. And to see it come full circle now to include diversity is why I've entitled my Pacific postcard Broadcasting for All, because that is the aim. We're using these terms like gender diversity and everything, but let's think of the end goal, which benefits us all, and it's that we are truly public broadcasters, ensuring that what we do is for everybody. We're going to do 2 key messages and a call to act, because I want to keep this short and sweet. I know it's been a lot of talk festing, and to keep it interactive, I'm going to ask my media sister, Maggie Boyle, to take part in an exercise with me. As you can see outside, there's been some very relaxing massaging going on, courtesy of Pure Fiji and this wonderful venue. And I just want you to get your mindset into that mode of relaxation, because we're going to do a bit of a random walk around the room. And Maggie's going to ask you one question and drop in on a few of you and ask you one question that I don't want you to overthink the answer to. 30-second soundbite is all we're after, but Maggie's going to walk in and pop by a few of you, just while you're thinking of the topic of broadcasting for all and what our organizations can do to cross that line. Thank you, Maggie. How are you going with the walk around?
Hi. What's the question?
Maggie, you're going to smack them with the question too, girl.
What is FBC doing in regards to gender? Look, our policy is very, very simple. We want to encourage more females in the workplace. However, the underlying fundamentals of our recruitment process is based purely on merit. And it was because of this fact that not so long ago, out of the 7 senior managers, 4 of them were females. It's changed slightly in the last year, and now we've got 3 females instead of 4. However, in middle management, we have 6 radio stations. For the first time in the country's history, 5 out of the 6 radio program directors are females. And it hasn't made any difference to anyone in terms of how they're being treated. Everyone works with anyone who's got experience and who's got management capabilities. So it all comes down to the fact that our recruitment policy is very good, and thanks to Janice, and she keeps an eye on all this, that we do have a process to do background checks when we hire people, and we make sure that we try and recruit the best people in the field. And whether it's a female or a male or a person with disabilities or anyone for that matter, it doesn't matter. We don't care where they come from, what religion they follow, what province they're from, as long as they have the capabilities to do the job well and to manage people well, and they're good people who actually believe in the country and the development of Fiji, we hire them.
Thank you, Riaz.
I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. I can't believe all that just popped off the top of your head. Well done. Thank you. While Maggie's walking around, about to select the next random person, Let me just give a bit of background to the work that's been happening in media, because what we found when we were starting out and partnering with media and advocating gender was the same problem that we had advocating gender to our governments. The word was very foreign. It didn't translate well, and it still doesn't for many of our governments, into the national dialect or the national languages. It's seen very much as a UN-imposed foreign flower, a concept that we have to deal with simply to fulfill reporting responsibilities and to get the funding that's involved in rolling out programs. Happily, that's changed in today's context. Maggie, next question.
We have Kathy from SIBC, Solomon Islands Broadcasting Corporation. Gender action in...
What does gender mean to your organization?
Thank you, Maggie and Lisa. As you know, we are not in television and as large as our other Pacific neighbors, we have only radio. In terms of employment, we have 50-50 actually. 50% of our staff is female, 50% male. So I think we were covered there in terms of gender balance. But it's not because we wanted it that way. We recruit by merit too, yeah? So it turns out that way, it's good. In terms of programs that we produce and we air, we have programs that we want to feature women and what their experiences in the rural setting, what they would like the government to do, what challenges they face. And so we feature women in the programs that we run at SIBC.
Thank you, Kathy. We will be coming back onto those topics later. Look, it's great that there's such a level of detail in your answers. I think we will take one more, though, before I just take us across the two key messages I want to share.
Hi. I think it's great that recruitment is made based on merit, but I also think that media has a greater responsibility in terms of setting an example for and setting a new benchmark, because I think that there isn't enough female leadership that's in the marketplace. If you look at PNG, for example, you look at all of the politicians, every single one of them during these last elections were male. And it's not because women aren't good enough or they don't have the skill sets, it's because there's an emphasis that's placed on what it means to be male and males being leaders. There's that misconception that's out there, and I think that we need to turn that. And so for us, we make a conscious decision to ensure that we have an equal balance of male and females. And I think that there's not enough emphasis that's placed on, what female or what women can provide as leaders that's different to men. So their upbringings or their experiences and what they go through is totally different to what a lot of the men go through, and that is something we need to place more emphasis on as a contributing factor when we have our management meetings, when we go through new topics, when we talk about programming. So those points of views, I think that is underestimated, and when you emphasize more on those key points, then that elevates, I guess, as a whole, what they can contribute. And so in terms of MTV, 50% of our leadership is female, and when we look at our programming, there is almost there is more programs that we particularly emphasize that has more female hosts, that has more female programming. We have Women's World, we've got Point of View, we've got Awesome One, where they're all target key issues of gender-based violence and gender equality, because I think it's not fairly represented in other organizations, that we have to almost make up the gap. And it's important to set that example.
Thank you, Matthew. Message one. I've just heard 3 sound bites, and all of them were over the required limit. You had to take a couple of breaths to fit that sound bite in, but it just exemplifies that we have been talking about this issue for a long time. And there has been a bit of walking along the way, but I challenge us to think about how we can step up the action and the impetus to that walk so that we are walking together. And there are some key areas why I feel that walking together makes media more powerful, more organized, more productive. It's the same thing with the women's movement in the Pacific. It's the same issues that have made the women's movement so popular. Women recognized that when they talked about gender together and worked and walked together, that unity brought its own special magic and special power. So let's just go back then to Section J. Because we talk about gender, yes, we talk about the foreign flower issue, but I want to hit that myth on its head. Section J of the Beijing Platform for Action. 2 outcomes: women accessing and leading the media, so the issues that you've highlighted around women leading and deciding in media organizations. And secondly, of course, the content area where Sharon and FemLink have played such a key role in monitoring the news organizations of the region. Those were Pacific commitments. All our Pacific countries were there in Beijing and endorsed that language. Media sisters in this room, media brothers who managed the newsrooms, sent us on the roads around the world to negotiate this text. So this, for me, is a Pacific promise as much as it is a global one. There was nothing foreign in it. So for me, again, it's a jump in trying to make our audiences understand when we're talking about these issues, these are commitments that we ourselves have made. In those bubbles that we don't often talk about, the government, the civil society bubbles, because we're the media newsroom bubble, but nevertheless, this is text that we must own because it did come from us. It did come from Asia as well. Message 2. It's about content, yes. And content, I feel, in terms of its impact and what you're doing in the Pacific is being measured through the FemLink and the Global Media Monitoring Project. But that question of being about us is a very significant one because I feel it's one that we have not answered fully. And while it's gratifying for me to hear about, recruitment and leadership, we are still at a point in time where women leaders are in the minority. There isn't a clear career path for women to stay in newsrooms once they marry and hit that wall where who's going to look after the kids? Why are you going out and doing these assignments and covering all these people? Why aren't you home with your child? So those gender stereotypes and expectations affect women in journalism as much as they affect women across the rest of the workforce. So it's a question that the media industry answers or has to be accountable for as much as all the other jobs, all the other workplaces where women go. And I think the key thing about challenging ourselves with that question, it's about us, means that we take that question of organizational responsibility and we take it deeper into what I call the third dimension, the personal. What does gender mean to me? We've talked about what gender means in our organizations. Yes, yes, very nice. But what does gender mean to me when I'm in HR and I'm recruiting and I see a woman and a man of equal strength on their CV walk through the door? And she tells me in the interview that she'll be having a baby soon. Who am I going to give the job to, really? So those issues come into account. And I think the key challenge to walking that talk and making it count as an organization is owning that commitment inside your own skin and knowing that you are the champion for gender and diversity and broadcasting for all, not just on paper, not just in a few nice numbers that show 50% levels of content and workforce representation, but you're a personal champion, that you take that messaging to your conversations, you take it into account in your personal, because the personal informs the professional decisions that we make. And we know this because a lot of the times when we come together to talk about the news, we talk about how the personal dictates our news-making decisions. Our so-called search for truth, our neutrality, our independence is all informed by our cultural perceptions of gender, our background, how we were raised, our parenting, how our parents treated each other around us, and what we learned from that. So just the challenge that I'm putting out there, that it is about the personal dimension as well as content, as well as organizational change. And here's where I'm ending, the call to act. It's a challenge, it's an idea, and I've got a minute to explain it, which is all good, because it's only going to take a minute to explain. And it's about looking at gender diversity, at looking at this wonderful approach as part of a corporate management mix, as an approach that makes broadcasting better, that brings you profits because your workers are happier, because they're more productive, because they know that no matter what happens in their home life or working hours or after work hours, the boss has got their back, with clearly written policies that are enforced, not with crisis policies that come into place when a problem happens, when there's an issue at work or in the house, especially when it comes to addressing the safety of women and the hours they work at night in parts of Melanesia where transport systems do not exist. So that extra level of corporate responsibility is there. So I'm saying it's very doable, and it's very good for profit and productivity to look at the notion of a baseline gender audit. You take a look and you just report on a template that we all share as members on issues of staffing, on the question of pay levels, on policies that you're doing, and especially on the soft part, the community and social responsibility that we do for groups, you know, like the cake for the Pinktober campaign, the actions I know, the ribbons I know that you all wear for the 16 days of violence. Let's record those. Let's make that annual report or biannual report, the gender audit reports of our organizations, as important as your financial reports. And let's use those reports as a baseline to measure progress and accountability, not just to ourselves, not just to each other, but to the public. Let's make those reports public. Yes, you can black out the pay scales and, you know, the sensitive financial stuff, but look at where it got the BBC. They're in trouble over it. But, you know, share your good deeds. Share your support for diversity for all and broadcasting for all. Share it, because it will come back to you in this new social media era, in this new citizen engagement era, and it will build your brand and credibility as news organizations. Because news organizations are not just about truth anymore, not just about the news. I'm sorry. It's about the role you play and the engagement and the responsibility that you serve in communicating and being the communications bridge in our communities. And that's very important in the Pacific. In closing, you see that smart logo there, Pacific Wave Media Network, Women Advancing a Vision of Empowerment. All those years ago, me being threatened with sacking, to now, we have this. We don't have resources, we're an online network, and many of the women broadcasters in this room are part of this informal online network. This network owes its strength to ABU, so I thank Javad and the team. It owes its strength to Fayesia and the PMP for giving the support and the space for us to talk about the issues that matter, and it owes its strength to the women who keep coming up to me wherever I go and say, how's WAVE? It's a sisterhood. It's actually existing online. We don't have resources, but we will get there, and we will support you in gender auditing and broadcasting for all. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa, and thanks for demonstrating all the work and the efforts and your views over the years and bringing that to us today. Very much appreciated. And thank you to the other speakers. We don't have time now for Q&A, but we have had some interaction from the audience via Lisa's talk then, and thank you to those three people who gave us some insights there. We appreciate that. We've only got a few minutes left. I wanted to just give some practical ways how we can move forward with gender and diversity. I've got a PowerPoint, Dean, that I'm just going to now very selectively go through because we've just got a few minutes left and then off to lunch. The first couple of slides is just a timeline about what the ABU has been doing in the area of gender. It started off being just about gender, as our other speakers have mentioned, and we've broadened that to the other areas of diversity which have been covered. You know what they are. All the speakers have made reference to them. They were driven, the drivers, of course, were the UN Beijing Platform for Action, etc., which has also been mentioned today, the global media monitoring. So you do have some data there on content and the gender-sensitive indicators for media. So the ABU has had those as drivers and in the background. They've done three things over the years since about 2011. They launched Broadcasting for All Focus on Gender Guidelines, which was a resource for broadcasters across the Asia-Pacific region. We then said, okay, it's fantastic having a written resource, but how do we put that into practice? So then we developed workshops, and those workshops were to assist organisations to develop their own gender and diversity plan, and that's what we've been doing since then in a range of forums. We had some pilot organisations in the region, and we have delivered some specific workshops, which I'm just going to do a really quick overview in a minute. And the third element has been the fantastic Women with the Wave forums, which is a one-day conference. Or the original one was two, but now one-day conference in association with the General Assembly each year. So it's in a different location. We have a terrific range of speakers, and we change the format each year. So we have progressed in those three areas. So I'm not going to go through all the dates or the workshops. The forum's aims were to showcase content and services, to demonstrate policies and best practice, and also invite people to come along and discuss and network, which is what we're doing today. Last year at the Women with the Wave, we had some practical actions which we're going to look at this year to write to members and say these are the actions that came out of that conference, and to say where can we assist and where are they up to, and every organisation's different, every country's different, the demographics are different in many cases, so we aim to tailor rather than just have a broad brush for everybody. And so that just brings me to the last couple of minutes. Last year, the last lot of workshops that we did were Colombo and Tunis, and they were very practical, hands-on workshops for media organisations, and they were to assist them to develop their own gender and diversity plan by the end of the 2 days. It comes with templates, discussion, and we go on a journey over the 2 days. So we say, where are you up to now? We look at, I'll just jump to that slide. We had 50 people at Colombo, and we had 20 at the Arab States Broadcasting Union, Tunis. So we set the scene. We said, where are you up to? What's your data? Have you measured? Sometimes, organisations say, well, we're doing quite well. We have these policies that are equal, but have they looked at the data? So we look at the data. And I was at the Australian Broadcasting Corporation as Manager Diversity for the last 22 years, and we were at a starting point a long time ago, and we've progressed and built up our data over time. And that came about not by, gee, I hope it happens, or some influences or some topical things, but by having strategic plans in place and making a difference that way. Then we looked at the business case. So everything we do is linked to the business case because we are businesses, whether we're public or private, big or small, and we have audiences to engage with. And we need to have all those voices, and we need to reflect those in the workplace and on air, because that's your bread and butter. That's who you connect with. And that, you know, whether you're ratings driven or not, that makes a difference. And the other important thing, which has also been referred to today, is leadership. Diversity is one of those areas that has to be led from the top. So we talk about that. So we talk about their business case. We talk about the leaders. We have diversity champions. They might have just choose one area, disability or gender or women towards leadership or cultural diversity. And that we have some groups. At the ABC, we had divisional reference groups. So every division, news, radio, television, they had their own diversity reference groups, and that was chaired by the director of that division in every case. And that was powerful, because that sent a message that we're taking this seriously, and we had stakeholders in each division. And the other thing is that we develop with the organisations a communication strategy. So how do we tell our staff what we're doing? How do we influence what training's needed, and moving forward with that? So there's 4 strands to the gender and diversity plan. The first one's leadership, which I've just touched on then. That's putting in the plan, these are the actual actions with responsibility and timeframes, usually over 3 years. I've written the ABC's one in the last 20 years. We're now on the 4th one. Putting KPIs in the senior managers' job plans so that they're accountable for diversity. Developing a mentor framework, champion framework, so they know how it all works, and leadership training. Unconscious bias is something that you've all heard of that's been introduced in organisations, not just media. And reviewing our corporate documents for inclusive language, you know, things like that. The second big area is representation, getting people in the door, bringing people up to the same starting point so that they can meet the selection criteria on merit. Pipeline activities, internships, careers days. When they're in the door, how do you support them? Having accessible workplaces for people with disabilities, etc. And development programs. We have a springboard program for women. We have a cultural diversity ideas group, and we have an extensive, at the ABC, Indigenous program and Indigenous staff conferences, etc., etc. And the big thing that we're talking about today, if you can just give me one more minute, is